Everyone, welcome to this Wednesday seminar. Today we have a very interesting speaker, Professor Anup Singh, who is member of the 15th Finance Commission of India, which is a body constituted every 5 years to decide upon the distribution of tax revenue between the state governments and the central government. He will be taking us through his views and thoughts on the Chinese financial integration, the equity markets, the bond markets, what they're doing overseas, and I've requested him to perhaps try and inject India-China comparative perspective as well, because most researchers here and audience members might be interested to see where China stands vis-a-vis India, but it's always not possible in many fields to do that. So without further ado, please, I think Professor Singh will take about 30 minutes for the presentation, and after that we will open it up for a Q&A session, and I hope most of you here will have something to ask of them, and that will lead us to a rich discussion. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Also, I think you are talking about a very important issue. We've all been through the last 4 decades when China has been leading the world in what is called trade and product integration with the rest of the world. And there are many numbers around how much this has boosted global growth. Now, by the way, I'm talking about this from my times at the IMF and our own role in China over the last many years. So this is not in any way linked to my current role, but I'm very happy to come and do this. My point is basically that China has already embarked on the next stage of its integration, and is embarked on financial integration, which we will call capital account opening, but I think this is what they are seeing as the next phase of the integration of the world. From all technical reports and research available, this will have another positive effect on China and the world, because, to put it in one sentence, it should allow the more efficient direction and use of savings and investment in China and overseas. We've seen this on the product market side, and we are hopefully going to see this now on the financial side. The point I want to make is that as China has developed its role globally on product markets, it has also, in parallel, been developing its financial sector development. I say that because it already has, I would say, the largest banks in the world by many criteria. It has the second largest equity market in the world already. And although its bond market has not developed anywhere like the banks have, on some accounts, as the chart tells you, it has is close to the third largest bond market in the world. However, having said this, there's a very important fact to remember, which will tell us where China needs to go in the future. The first is that the financial system in China is still what I call bank-centric, meaning it's banks. You see here of corporate financing, the red pie tells you what comes essentially from the banking side. It's also overall not well integrated yet globally. And that is what I mean by saying this is the next stage of the aspirations in the next 10 years. You see here, if you look at China's liabilities to foreigners, that is claims of non-residents on China, on the left-hand side, is just 40% of their GDP, which as a ratio is even slightly below that of India. If you look on the asset side, which is Chinese residents holding of foreign assets, is even lower. You see that quite clearly there, especially when you talk about portfolio equity and debt. So the issue is that the markets have grown, the banks' assets are huge, however it's focused on banks and China's markets are not yet globally integrated. And therefore there is a clear need from China's own point of view, but also from the rest of the world, to foster more external opening, especially of investment and financial services. Overall, up to now, China remains less open in these areas than most other G20 emerging markets, especially in services and FDI. And what this shows you is, on the right-hand side, that China's FDI in percent of GDP has actually been trending down in recent years. Now, this is partly linked to what's going on with the US and China. And the agreement with the US, which is underway, is going to shift more to services, capital, and financial opening. What's interesting is that China has already in the past 1 year announced major changes, lifting major restrictions on foreign investment in the financial sector. This is exactly what the US has been asking for many, many years, well before the current US administration. China has already begun to get rid of all foreign ownership limits on securities firms, life insurers, and other financial agencies. China is removing entry restrictions for foreign insurance companies, and from this year onwards, foreign banks can set up branches in China without a local partner. They can even be 100% owned by the foreign bank. So I'm saying in the last 9 months to 12 months, they've made a huge number of announcements to signal that they are serious about their financial integration. The process has already started. Now, separately from all this, they are following their BRI. They've already announced, what the numbers we have here is already their own aspiration that they are trying to more or less raise to 200% GDP the infrastructure investment overseas from China. So this is going ahead both in terms of regulations for foreign investments in China, at the same time also it is being paralleled, I would say, by the aims for the BRI. But see, while this is all expected and needed as much as by China as by the rest of the world, it's important first, I think, to step back a bit and look at the macro financial context of all this. It's important because China has needed to deleverage its debt, better price risk. We've seen in the last few years concerns on financial system stability. We have seen, for example, important researchers say that by any conventional economic criteria, China should have had a financial crisis 5 years ago.
Yes.
And I won't go into that yet. But I mean, so the issue is ensuring financial system stability has to be the opening step in order to maintain the integration globally on the financial side. Now, it's also interesting because, I'll come back to this, if you look at the last few years, you know very well, there's been considerable turbulence, tension in financial markets arising out of market concerns on the high debt. There have also been defaults taking place, and Santosh and I spoke about this just now. So although bond defaults have increased, and including recently, it's important to note that the default rate remains below 1%. So it's happening, but it's tiny as a percent of the market. So they have gone through what I would call, and what people have called, a regulatory storm in the last 2 years, which has been needed to tackle the stability risks. They've done a huge number of stuff to reduce the size of shadow banking, to reduce interconnections between banks and non-banks, and a huge number of steps to basically reduce the rate of growth of credit to the real sector. But essentially, we know and they know, the world knows, in the last 7 or 8 years, what's happened is China's growth rate has been credit finance and debt finance, which means that as China's growth has come down, their debt as a ratio and a rate of growth has increased, which implies clearly that productivity has been falling in the last 6 or 7 years. So this is the fact. And this is reflecting all the issues you know very well about, the state-owned enterprise and so on. So the issue they have realized this 3-4 years ago in a process that was nicely, in my view, led by the People's Bank of China, among others. And they're trying to tackle these risks. And you have therefore seen that there have been slowing credit growth, bank access to GDP ratios have been declining for the first time. All this has been taking place. The issue now is, where are we now? Because they are not trying to, what they say, the word they use it, they're trying to calibrate their deleveraging. What do I mean by trying to calibrate it? These are some numbers done by the IMF a few months ago. What this tells us is that beginning in probably the middle of 2019 and continuing through now, China has been so concerned about the risk that its growth may fall well below 6, although it has accepted that their concern must be on the quality of growth and not the quantity of growth. There is concern it is falling off faster than they had expected. So what have been doing the last 9 months has been calibrated. Calibrating means they are again beginning to give stimulus, which they had tried to stay away from the last 3 years. What this means is that just by what they've done the last 9 months, you will see that their debt, the non-financial debt ratio will probably begin to rise now. And the issue is for this to be, for them to sustain their progress, this calibration must be small, selective. It must not be like it's been the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. This is crucial not only for China's more stability, it's also crucial, and they understand this, in order to raise their global role integration in financial sector. They've got to retain not just stability, they've got to retain market perceptions of stability. And therefore the debt ratio must not go up again, it must keep coming down. So I think that's a macro financial context where there are still open question marks, but they realize this. And so how they manage this in the next 12 to 15 months is important. It's also important that it seems that the US and China have reached an agreement now on the first phase, and this must help. So what I want to now go to is that they have already made strong public announcements that financial opening is the next phase of China's global integration. Li Keqiang, the Prime Minister, made important statements on this. In particular, they have focused on the bond market, and they're trying to develop that because they know this they need to do, as also we need to do here in India, they need to do it in order to use resources, domestic and foreign, in a more efficient way. This has implications for the bond market as it exists now in China, and I'd like to go on to that for the next few minutes. It's important to note that although the bond market has increased a lot, it should not be a surprise to us that until now more than 60% of the total bond market is driven by the government and the quasi-government, sovereign, the policy banks, and especially the local bond markets. It's important also to note that among these government shares, the local government bond swap program has become the most important. What this tells you is that China's bond market has really got some rather unique characteristics. Because their liberalization has happened in the last 15 to 20 years, it's happened at times with a rush. It's interesting that it has many segments, and these segments are guided by different regulations and different regulatory agencies, because this reflects the waves of their development and liberalization. So the segmentation of the market has many reasons, but it is possible this segmentation is a problem looking ahead, because as you are trying to raise the shares owned by foreigners, they're dealing with different segments, regulatory agencies, rules and tax efforts. And that's important that this needs to be clarified. It's particularly important to note that the bonds issued by the local government financing vehicles have become almost the most important. This has been done reflecting their concerns after the global crisis 10 years ago. It's also interesting that this has developed despite their deleveraging, which is trying to stop local governments from issuing financing vehicles. But this has now already become a growing share of the bond market. And therefore the issue is a very simple one. If government-related bonds, therefore, are still the most important percentage of the bond market, are these ratings skewed, and are there therefore implicit guarantees? What's interesting is that what stands out is the rating distribution. In China, 95% of their credit bonds, as we call them, are rated at AA or above. That you see that here. Now, we should not be surprised by that, because in order to be issued, the bond has to be rated AA or better. It just makes a point that they are only trying to approve the issuance of bonds which are going to be rated AA and above. What this therefore means is that the implicit guarantee on these bonds is still huge. And that is the problem therefore for what is rated going forward. Let me talk briefly now about recent developments and reforms. We know that as they have been announcing, and there have been a number of changes, starting with the announcement by the MSCI of the inclusion of government bonds, and the announcement by Bloomberg with Barclays to include China's bonds in the global bond index, there's already been a surge in portfolio inflows. And this tells you in the chart on the left-hand side how much the surge has been in the last 2 years between debt and equity. So this has all happened in the last 2-3 years. It has also been helped in some regard by the renminbi now being regarded as one of the currencies accepted by the IMF in terms of their SDG. The point is that as foreign holdings of bonds have certainly jumped and surged, as I said. What exactly is taking place? These foreign inflows, holdings of China's bonds, are still almost entirely into the sovereign bonds and the policy bank bonds. Exposure to onshore corporate credit bonds has been very small. This partly reflects the concerns markets may have from overseas. It also partly reflects the lack of confidence they might have on the ratings, but the implicit guarantee of sovereign and other related bonds is where the money is going from foreign holdings. There are a number of other hurdles and uncertainties that need to be clarified for China to move further here. A part of these are simply tax uncertainties. They have announced over time certain exemptions for 3 years on certain holdings of bonds. It's not completely clear to all holders in which segment these apply to. So therefore there needs to be some harmonization of the various programs of holding bonds, and what is clear is that the turnover of bonds remains very low even compared to its Asian competitors. Therefore there's a need to improve liquidity and to narrow the gap between the on and off shore bonds. What's interesting is that China seems to be fully aware of these concerns. It'll be kind of quite complicated to think of concerns that China needs to address that are not already being considered by their own people. 2 years ago, it set up a major committee headed by the People's Bank of China to try to unify regulations and to break this segmentation between the different bonds. They have also now opened up the market for foreign credit agencies. As far as I know, S&P was the first credit rating agency to rate China's domestic bonds, and Fitch and Moody's are also following. This is not simply a reflection of the People's Bank or the Li Keqiang. It's also been in the work program of the Party Congress last year that this is where China needs to go. So this whole development, and particularly of the bond market, has received approval at the highest level. Among the reforms that are needed, they need to develop, obviously like any other market, hedging instruments and boost liquidity. And as capital markets are becoming more sophisticated in China, people do say that along with strengthened regulation, they need capacity building. Now in India, we are always a bit concerned about saying build up capacity in monitoring regulation, but this tells you that over the last 10 years, the capacity of staffing to regulate has remained unchanged.
The thing is internal. So what is the pressure, I would put it? Is it that, as you correctly brought out, that the Communist Party doesn't want to go? Right? And possibly this is the main issue which is there, shall I put it, and as often spoken by us in the military, the biggest enemy of China is the Chinese people themselves. No, I'm saying, at least I'm not giving you military issues, so that's why you must enjoy something. The Chinese people are the biggest enemy, which you brought out in many ways, that they don't want the party to go. So, what is it, how can they get rid of these SOEs? Because even Vietnam has got rid of these SOEs, I was posted there. India is doing its best to, privatize Air India, it's doing its best, I will say. May not be able to. Do you see a ray of hope in this, or how do you feel?
Go first, or?
No.
I'll give you two answers, one unexpectedly. So you're from the military.
Yes, I'm a general from the army.
Why I focused on that is about 3-4 years ago, when I was my last year before I left the IMF, we were asked to meet a group of senior Chinese retired people. a very special environment
Yes.
in Washington. So I went along with around it. The entire group of 10 people, you know who they were? They were retired, very, very senior military people from the Chinese army. So I asked, well, how come you're here talking about the economic sector? Oh no, we want to understand China's economy. It's very important for us because we advise the leadership on the economy. You have the army, senior retired people, talking to the IMF to advise their leaders on the risks of the economy. Outstanding. I said, amazing. That was quite amazing. Now, on your question, a one-sentence answer, what do the Chinese say? The Chinese will say, what are you worried about? You look at the last 10 years, the share of growth or GDP, or share of the growth rate coming from SUVs has been coming down. Today, more than half of China's growth is from the non-SUVs, of course, much more than half. This is why we worry. It is going down over time. Next 10 years, it will continue. What is the concern? So their answer is, we are doing it by opening up the rest of the economy. I'm not saying whether they're doing it the right way, I'm saying this is their answer, and it's very difficult to refute that because it is a trend out way.
Thank you very much. It was a fantastic one, particularly related to the bond market and the linking to TPP also. As far as the bond market concerned, I had been the first-hand experience of the dominance of the SOEs and signing the third-party agreements with the SOEs, SPV, with CMOC, Sinopac and the China nuclear, all those things. I handled it. So their dominance in the bond market is there. Now, considering three things: one is that lender and debtors part of it, creditor part of it. Second is that this SOE dominance. And third is that generally, no matter SOE or the other corporates, China is the low yield bonds.
Yes.
Considering this, how much going to be the attractiveness for the foreign players in the bond market? Because India is comparatively 10 years bond yield between 6 to 7%, or sometimes it is going to 8%, because inflation is low there. The shadow banking as well as the banking interest rates are quite low. So bond yield is expected to be quite lower, though the volume could be decent.
What's interesting is if you look at the credit spread, I would say the good non-SUV bond issuers, they have higher spreads than the SUV because of this implicit guarantee. It comes down to one issue. You've got to end this practice of what market believe is a guarantee. As long as they're doing that, they can borrow cheaper than the non-SUV. That is a problem that shows up in pricing as well. They've got to deal with that issue too. We want markets, as China opens up, to invest more in bonds issued by the non-SUVs. But they have the highest spread right now, even though they are much more efficient, because there is a guarantee of the SUV.
I'm sorry, so where is the money investment coming in the non-SOEs?
The most of the
Foreign
high share of foreign holders of bonds is with the government SOE bonds, not in the non-SOE.
Thank you.
Clarify a lot of things. I have two basic issues. One is the Chinese, they were saying that crossing the river by peeling the stones.
They use that very sentence for the bond market.
Okay.
That very sentence has been used in explaining their plan for the bond market.
Because they were doing it in the economic reform, I was looking at many things. They are peeling it, experimenting, then going next. That is one aspect. Second, if you look at their domestic savings, still it is high, and how they are integrating to their overall economic market.
See, that's very important. The world wants them to be given the freedom to invest overseas, outside. And that is part of the whole process, is to open it up.
And the third leg of my question is, how they are integrating the overseas Chinese in business, apart from the large corporates, Paitu or the other big players in the, because they are also operating in other stock markets. So how that the whole thing is integrating, and that is giving the advantage. For example, this year, Xi Jinping himself come and stated that the main goal will be, main target will be integrating the financial market. And that right is not possible.
Your third question, I'm not going to give you the correct answer from a political point of view, but I would say from the practical point of view, China has been very open in not distinguishing and separating capital and economic links from whether it's from Vietnam or from Taiwan or anywhere else. One of the biggest investors in China are from the Taiwan.
Yeah, that
And where
almost a plus.
Vietnam is concerned, at a time when there was huge concern with the South China Seas and Vietnam, there was no breakdown in the linkages between China and Vietnam. So China has found a way to separate these things out. You want to invest with us, they're kind of, it looks like they say, we don't care who you are, come do it. They will regulate what you can invest in, what percentage you can, but now they seem to be opening it up. For them to say, in principle, any foreign bank can open up fully owned branch, that's a big step. Now, they have to approve it, I suppose, but they followed the process so far. Let's see how far they are. It's a very important question.
Listen, thanks. 3 questions. Shareholding pattern of Chinese banks. Is foreign shareholding allowed?
Only to a
Chinese
very small amount. They're now opening it up. So far it's been highly and tightly restricted and regulated. They're now opening it up.
Second, do the Chinese banks invest in state-owned enterprises or even private enterprises?
I would say so far the problem has been that bank credit goes to the SOE, and even till now, I think they still get the majority, more than 50%. The problem is that the private sector, the startups which are functioning in China, they're not getting enough credit. So the challenge for China is to change this and to allow the resources to flow to the most productive sectors. That's what they need to do. They are doing it slowly.
Do you consider this as a source of strength of Chinese economy? That Chinese banks have invested in a whole lot of enterprises, owned by the state and private. And what has been the return on investment? Because look at India, our experience has been just different.
You see, that you're talking about financial stability and insolvency and all those issues. I would say the Chinese banks that are now the biggest in the world, I think the top 3 banks are now in the world are Chinese.
Where assets.
Top 2 assets. I would say that the concerns on stability, non-performing loans and insolvency come more from the provincial banks and that local governments are borrowed from. And these large state, I don't think their equivalent of the State Bank of India has the same potential problems as the SBI had. So there is a difference, I believe, in that.
See, China is a huge country. What's the role of the insurance sector in the scheme of financial institution?
So of the
Insurance.
Insurance. They've opened it up now. They're allowing foreign insurance companies to come in. This is part of the new law of last year. They're opening up insurance to foreign insurance companies. They're opening it up. I'm not sure exactly the percentage or the share, but it is an important segment of the opening up last year is in insurance.
So is it state-owned entirely right now?
So far.
And what
But
do they
they're
do with
opening
the
it up.
money they mobilize?
Well, it's the same in Canada, Korea, and the US. They don't invest in infrastructure in India or anywhere else. They need to invest in infrastructure.
With the $2 trillion of foreign currency reserves, the largest in the world,
3 trillion.
trillion.
It's now gone back up to 3.1, right?
is there a deliberate government policy to undervalue the renminbi to give them a competitive advantage in export?
There's a very easy answer to that. The easy answer from my side is that was the issue until 3-4 years ago. That was the issue in the first 10 or 15 years of after the joint WTO. What is interesting is that the US has just announced like 2 days ago that they are not going to label the renminbi of China as a currency manipulator. Now, just for fairness, the IMF has the mandate, has the global mandate to say which currencies are being manipulated. That's part of the IMF role. And as of 4 or 5 years ago, the IMF made an official statement from our side that Chinese currency is now close to equilibrium and is not being manipulated. So the issue is that you are right until 2012, 2014, when we had current account surpluses of 8 to 10% of GDP. Now they have no very small current account surplus, and so there is no current effect of manipulation. They probably do manage currency quite clearly, but people don't believe they are manipulating it in keeping it away from where it should be.
In fact, yesterday it is depreciated.
Yes,
It's almost
Yesterday it
depreciated.
depreciated 7%.
Ravi.
One more supplementary, Anup. You mentioned that now there is a greater degree of liberalization in the investment that can happen in China, both in, I presume it is both in equity and in debt.
Yes.
And so this leads to the question that is asset seizure possible in China for if somebody defaults in payment, can the foreign lender seize the asset? And has this ever happened in China? Is such a thing possible? Presumably, those who are lending to private companies where there is no sovereign or quasi-sovereign guarantee will secure them against some sort of security.
Collateral, yes.
So if those things go bust, and with these startups and all these kind of new economy things, this is highly possible. Then there is a prospect of seizure. Now, under a communist regime, where a lot of the fundamental assets like land is a public asset, it's a, right? So, is a seizure possible? I mean, a security in a lending agreement can be seized legally. But the communist system says certain things are inviolate. It can't be seized. So how do you square this problem?
Okay, you need to ask an investor that, a potential investor, but my answer as an economist is this. My sense is that as China has opened up in the last 20 years, it has been very careful in what is called the enforcement of contracts and in the absence of retroactive change in contracts. So basically China, when they opened up, and when they've allowed foreign investment and foreign goods and investment to take place, they have generally said we are playing the global rules. And my sense is they are so far, that's my sense. And therefore now they're opening up the financial side, they understand that they should not now act against global rules. They're very careful. We should issue your contract, we will follow the contract. So contract enforcement is the most important issue to get investment, and you avoid retroactive changes. I say that that's a big issue here.
Yeah.
These are two things where I think China has been pretty good in that regard. Once they've agreed to new contracts, they try to follow it.
Anyone else from the? This I just want to give a chance to the people at the back end of the hall. Anyone? No? Okay.
Thank you. Just this question about the bond market actually growing at the provincial level is growing very fast. In a way, it's a throwback to the earlier times when the central party, central leaderships control over the provincial. So the first secretaries was not so strong, and that's where you had a massive sort of capital investment, infrastructure, the growth of coast cities and coast roads and bridges and so on and so forth. So, if that is happening now, if you analyze the political situation, is there a risk that China is building up to that kind of thing happening again? Because Xi Jinping required a major effort to actually get the provincial administration under his strict control. So I'm just thinking whether, it fits into the picture that is emerging from.
You see, I can't answer that. I will say that I agree with you. There is a contradiction between what Xi Jinping lets people believe he wants to do. There's a contradiction between that and how he's opening up the economy. There is a contradiction. And those who are going ahead with the opening up believe that once they enter into new contracts for new opening up, they will follow the contract. And that has been China's strength so far, why investment has come in. So I think this is very important. So when they open up, they do pilots and this and that. And they want to make sure once they do it, the contract is either for the contract or for the overall. They don't want to change that once it's open. So there is a contradiction, but the history is such.
Some time ago, I was invited to China for a discussion on regional security and development and cooperation between India and China. My interest was more on the security side, but it happened that they did not ask me to speak on security, but they asked me to speak on diplomatic cooperation between India and China. And more recently, the discussions have been taking place on the regional economic cooperation and partnership between South and Southeast Asian countries. Now, it came out in the discussion that India is not in a position to join the grouping, and there is a serious problem. Indian economy and Chinese economy, how the two economies can function together. Now, I want to know from your study, I am not aware of the subject that you dealt with, but I want to know whether you feel the prospects of economic and political cooperation between China and India can be improved in the context of your studies. And also whether, now America is playing an equally important part in developing relations between India and the US. So how do you view this whole problem? What is your perspective?
See, it's like what I said earlier on the side of the economy. When China wants to achieve certain objectives, whether through the economy or financial or other policies, that will help its economy overall. It doesn't. Now, I would say there's a huge amount of scope for India, my own personal view on this. China wants to open up lots of things in the country, including India. That is separate from political. Right? It just how, you have the ASEAN group of countries, ASEAN plus 3, and there have been huge difficulties with many ASEAN countries over the South China Seas and related issues. It has never stopped the opening up on the economic, financial side, and tourism and services. So the challenge is India should find out what China wants to do. It wants to open up more, establish more the links on shore with India too, separate from the political concerns of this and that. So they are able to compartmentalize separately this and this. And that is what my own view, we should take advantage of that. Now, with all these problems with the US over the years, so 2-3 years ago they announced that if you have an American passport and you stay for under 72 hours, no visa. Nothing. Just come in, show your proof you're leaving in 72 hours, that's it. So China is now playing the tourism side because they know that they will, in the end, benefit from it, both from Chinese going outside and foreigners coming back in. So I think it's quite remarkable how they can do these things if they are sure it helps the economy and they separate that out from the political side of the
Working there.
That's quite
But
remarkable.
you see, in the recent period, most of the South Asian countries have joined the BRI, China's BRI. India is left alone. India is more or less isolated. Now, in this context, what can India do to
You see,
improve its presence?
on that issue we just talking about it, I don't have the numbers. I would imagine that is still already much more investment, financial investment in India already than would have been through the BRI. So BRI is being talked about, we should forget about it. We should focus on getting Chinese money into India. They want to come in. They're already in there. In a number of important
No, you see, there is a problem with Pakistan.
You see how China can separate out Korea and North Korea and Taiwan and Hong Kong from the economy.
No, the basic challenge in South Asia is how to improve relations between China, India, Pakistan.
So that's
That will not be done.
Separate issue.
On the cooperation bit, I think, our bond market is better developed than the Chinese bond market.
I showed that as a percent to GDP.
So perhaps we can collaborate in developing their bond market in certain ways. Our experts can help them do that.
There's a lot of areas where they would love to. They basically want to, I think, my personal view, they want to open up the links in terms of tourism. It will help India a lot. Because you don't see Chinese tourists, you see more Chinese tourists in Paris and London than you see here.
It's their policy, not ours.
Who?
Chinese. Because our tourists are actually going large numbers there.
No, it's difficult to get a visa to come to India. It's not that easy.
No, I think, tourists, their tourism, actually they use it as a political.
No,
But I
that
think
they do.
you are correct. Visa is our problem, not Chinese problem.
No, that's what I mean.
Actually, we want more Chinese tourists in India.
It's
So if the
actually-
Chinese government take decision, yes, we'll do that.
You see, around
The bond market had driven. So there are concerns that as they begin to harmonize access to bonds, they will also deal with the capacity to regulate. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that this objective of China's financial integration globally is adopted at the highest level. There's no doubt the bond market has great potential. It's part of the process of securing new sources of financing for China's corporate, including the private sector. The inclusion in global indices that has taken place already has already given it a huge boost. I know in the BRI, they are setting up separate bodies within the BRI to try to monitor and announce capital market development to finance BRI projects. Reforms are underway. I would say much of these reforms needed are more regulatory and practical and less political or complicated. They need to simply uncomplicate the rules they have and move ahead. I think they realize that, and we can expect to see much more in the next 12 months. What is interesting is that China, in all its integration moves over the last 40 years, as it begins them, has always genuinely asked for comments, reactions and proposals from overseas. They have signed up, which has been not been very well known, they have signed up officially, I think a year and a half ago, with the IMF to have a broader focus on measures needed financial stability. So they are opening up, on the one hand, measures to ensure they're doing what they need to do for financial stability overall, and therefore their calibration point needs to be looked at very carefully. At the same time, they are also opening up in terms of the reform they need to increase liquidity, turnover, and have hedging instruments, the bond market. So a lot is underway, and they see this as the main priority of the next 10 years. What's interesting is what the US is doing, what is not very well known, and maybe it's not true, but my understanding was that under the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that Obama was trying to do and had got agreement on, the whole idea was to keep China out of it, to reach rules on many of these areas on financial opening, which China would then sign on to later on. And therefore, it would be that China would accept global rules in areas where the WTO does not have a mandate. So the idea was to get 11 or 12 countries involved, get approval, let China ask to be part of it. That will be a way in which China would accept global rules. Now it has turned around. Now it's down to the US and China, and therefore it's not clear whose rules are going to be adopted. Are they US? Are they Chinese? But the most important issue as we look at integration in the next 10 years is these rules have got to be global rules. They must be rules set for the global community. They cannot be US rules or Chinese rules. And what Obama was trying to do was to set global rules in areas of financial transactions not governed today by the WTO. And that is what we are not playing here. So there is a question mark how global rules will evolve in this area, which all other countries are very concerned with. So let me just stop there. As you have this PowerPoint to come back to later on.
Thank you very much. You managed to pack in quite a lot in 30 minutes.
And last thing I say is, the last report on this sheet of references is work done the last year by the IMF, and I've taken much of my charts from that. But you should read that last one that contains much about financial integration, in particular of the bond market.
Thank you. I particularly liked your the TPP theory of how rule forming will happen in the coming years after the post-Obama era. Similarly, I'll just pose a couple of questions before I open it out to the floor. So I have been toying with two theories of why this financial markets in China are still, under-regulated or a little behind the curve compared to all other areas of financial activity. And every time I think about this, I come back to two theories. One is that Chinese companies were mostly state-owned. They did not have a need for accessing these bond markets and raise money from the public. The second one is the private companies, the technology companies primarily. They all started listing in the US quite early in their sort of growth cycles. The Alibabas went to NASDAQ. So, although of course last 2 years around 32 Chinese companies have delisted. So there's a reversal of that trend. So this is one reason. There was no real need for a domestic market because of the state-owned economy and the access to the US market. Right. The other working theory I have on China's approach to financial regulation is that China believes that in these areas the market should first come and do its work, which is what shadow banking did. So there were 3,000 players which went bust, and then China regulators decided now it's time for us to get involved and put down these rules for how domestic bond raising and all of this can happen. And this is their approach for almost every financial, whether you take P2P lending, bonds, or even IPOs. IPOs for a long time were just by approval. In fact, the Chinese IPO market was started by the privatization of SOEs. they were just, wholesale, they were just listed on the stock exchange, rather than, the price fixing, the reverse book building and all of that which we see in other markets. So I would like to, my question to you is, how do you view China's approach towards regulations? Is it because of the need-based kind of analysis, or is it just their philosophy towards this area that they believe regulations should come at the end? Because in India we have the opposite approach. In all these areas that we mentioned, even if we have 10, 15 players in a new area, we regulate and then see how to sort of manage the growth.
But I think a simple answer is that they have had waves of attempts to liberalize over the last 20 years, whether it is the sovereign bond, whether it is the local government, whether it is policy banks, now private sector. Each time that the request has come to issue bonds for different categories, there has been segmentation of this sort. There have been different rules, and most importantly, different regulators. So there are almost 6 different regulatory agencies that are currently regulating the one market. And this was probably political when it was established. This is, to my mind, what needs to change. If you have different rules for different bonds, especially different from the non-SOEs and the SOEs, you've got to change that inequality, because all this eventually comes down to having implicit guarantees on what is called government bonds. So you've got to change that, and they're not there yet. And this is what, but separately from this, we need to work on SOE reform to take away implicit guarantees. Now, China is a big country, as you know, it's a big reform area. So the people who are talking about reducing segmentation and expanding the bond market, they're trying to find a way to get new financing for the non-SOEs. But to do that, you've got to bring down the role of the SOEs so that credit or bond market resources don't go to SOEs. But what we're hearing in the last 2-3 years in China is the opposite. The SOEs are not going to be reformed, they're going to be put together and become bigger. So this, I think, is the most important tension right now. Everything else is not going to work well unless you take away this inequality, this implicit guarantee. Now, India has a problem too, but it's probably most severe in China. They've got to deal with that problem before they can, in a very open way, open up their problem.
Talking about SOEs, interestingly, people in China genuinely believe that SOEs have receded because, their role used to be more social in nature earlier. They were actually, vehicles of social welfare. Now that role is almost gone. So although they control vast amounts of, leading enterprises and so on, the common perception in China is contrary to what outsiders believe.
So probably they still get a lot of credit for banks. If you look at the banking system, which is still most important, the distinction still going to SOEs is still huge. So there is that they're slowly dealing with this, but it's taking time. I'm trying to link up that effort along with financial integration. You can't have 2 different economies.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm not an economist, so
Which is good.
allow me to
Thinking
be a
of
little,
things in a different way.
allow me to be a little provocative. I think one has to look at it more as a political problem.
As
Political problem.
yes.
It is a problem of political management. And in that sense, the Chinese economy is not a free market economy. It's not even halfway there. And therefore, and the trend of the 19th Party Congress actually was further political centralization.
SOEs also.
SOEs and everything. So the question actually is that what is preventing China crossing the threshold? Is it the fear on the part of the Communist Party of China that if they cross the threshold, same problem that Gorbachev had, for example. If you cross that threshold, you lose control. And for example, when the Shanghai currency crisis took place, actually it was very much a political control to bring it under some kind of thing. So in that sense, the psychology of management of the economy, institutions of national economy. That needs to be gone into a little bit more to understand where we are going, where we're headed. And unlike the Soviet Union, if China has a sovereign, let's say, default, that the global, with the second largest economy. So you can think in terms of larger global implications of it. So my question really is that, and when you find bringing in of some of the foreign rating agencies, or even the IMF, for example, IMF actually accepted this yuan as an SDR just around the time of the Shanghai. So the point actually is that even the IMF, what kind of a pressure genuine pressure can generate for that kind of threshold to be crossed? So, rating agencies, they can manage, frankly, and all the crises that have taken place. The rating agencies actually are the ones to be blamed first, whether the Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis. So it's a larger issue of management. And now we have the problem being further compounded by what's happening in Hong Kong, which actually was in a way external window for the Chinese economic managers. So I'm wondering, I think it requires a little bit of that kind of a snapshot before we actually proceed to analyze as to what the prospects, the perspectives are. And it has global implications. I'm sorry, I'm really provocative.
No, you are correct. I would say China's report has been historically unparalleled. They've been trying to open up the economy, whether it is products, markets, exports, financially, insurance, over time. There's a group that is determined to do it. And their point is we are lifting people out of poverty, where the growth rates are huge, and therefore the process has worked so far. This group that continues to open up continues to do it. So,
And Xi Jinping very pleasant.
there is no doubt that he is what we call in India too a centralizer, I'd use that word. There's no doubt. But you see, they understand that the economy is very important. They understand. So, what sacrifice will they make for the economy? So far they've been a lot. It does not include the breakup of the Communist Party. So that is the problem. But my own sense is they've come as far as they've come. With every product we buy, even in India, being made in China. Already. So I'm saying you've got groups in China that are integrating the country. And the challenge is to do this by no one knows where it's going to go. But you know, they've gone through crises the last 30, 40 years and they've managed out of each one. Just on the economic side, the financial side, in 2013, 14, 15, no major world economists thought we would avoid the crisis, the financial crisis.
Ravi, sorry.
You don't charge this.
Please.
Thank you, Arun. That was really very, very clear and very crisp. So, my question is like this, that you took us through the trajectory of what one might call China's risk management process. That they recognize the risks and how they have moved to manage those risks, contain them, with some ups and downs, as you said, some stimuli and so on. But basically, that they have only exposed themselves to foreign borrowings to the extent of around 40% of their GDP.
Yes, foreign borrowing has been
Yeah.
that.
Now, so in terms of China as a creditor, they've tried to maintain responsibility or get back to a responsible position. However, on the other side, if you look at China as a debtor, China as a lender, lender, and you mentioned early on the BRI. Now here the behavior seems to be the other way, that it is not, or at least the risk management features, the prudence, it does not seem so evident. And it seems that the evaluation of projects and whatnot, however it is done, is sort of, if not shoddy, certainly over generous in many ways. So seems to be a schizophrenic approach. Why this kind of differentiation in the prudence you apply as a debtor, the lack of prudence you apply as a lender? Yeah, sorry, I'm getting confused here again. As a borrower and a lender, I think layman, as you said, layman's language is better. You're prudent as a borrower, but risky as a lender.
I think you raised a very, very, very important point. I see that because China as a debtor, in its role in international institutions like the IMF and World Bank, has actually been very good. They've been prepared to give more money to these institutions outside the normal procedures. When the IMF needed more money, the US was not authorizing a greater quota increase. So their role as a debtor has actually been exemplary. As a creditor, it is a transformation taking place now. It's a very important point. Now, as a creditor, as we found the last 25 years, countries have crises and they have to restructure their official debt. And the body that does this, in almost all cases, for official debt, is what is called the Paris Club of countries, run by France. The Paris Club officially does not include China as a member of the Paris Club, but China is always invited because China has a growing share in the debt of countries that are being. So, we'll see what happens in countries like Venezuela when they come, eventually come and so on. This is a very important point. So, the role of a creditor is very important. China has not demonstrated its full agreement and understanding of this in the way that other countries have. And as you know, a lot of people are now writing last 1 or 2 years that global debt is now at a historic high. What is more important than this global debt being high is who are the next debt crisis countries coming up. They're going to be in Africa. Next 10, 15 years. That's where the next problem is going to be arising.
Not US?
US is a separate. US is a separate issue. So if you have your own currency which is used for payments in the world, that's a separate issue. Without it.
China?
China is holding, I would say, a third to a half of China's reserves continue to be invested in US securities. A huge amount.
But China's national debt.
China's debt. So let's look at this from two sides. So the point is, if Africa is going to be the center of the debt crisis in the next 10 or 15 years, China will have to play a very important role in that. And the issue is, the Paris Club will not be fully in charge because they won't have enough of the share of the debt. So I'm saying you're right in saying that as a creditor, it's an open issue. Where China's debt is concerned, as I said, people talked 5 years ago about the crisis, the managed control. Rogov, who is now the leading economic economist from Harvard, he was asked 4 or 5 years ago about China's debt. He said, I thought we had a crisis 2 years ago. But anyway, all I'm saying in a long way is, you're right in focusing on the creditor role. It is not clear.
Yes. So thank you very much. I'm a military man, but I do follow and have written about China extensively. I wanted to ask you, I think you are absolutely right that they have a large amount of capital, somehow they generate it, all countries do. And as you rightly pointed out, Chinese themselves tell me, they met me yesterday also, they don't have the dollars like the US, where they can keep doing what they feel like. The SOEs has been a pain to them, I mean to say right from the beginning, but I found even now in the bond market, just 2% went to the private. And I was quite surprised to know, I believe Alibaba is the only private company now. As per the Chinese themselves, they were Chinese generals who met us yesterday, including the defense attaché Zhu Bao. And he also said only Alibaba is the strictly, if you go by the US norms, shall I put it. Because economic norms vary from country to country, vary from government to government. Growth rates keep changing as governments change, GDP changes. I mean to say, it's I think possibly the most flexible science and art which one has come across. Being a military man, I find it very entertaining, I would put it. So, I would like to ask you, in a society which is so well regulated and controlled, I'll say right from the top, having such educated people, handling affairs, amid their economists, they understand what's going on. How is it that they have not been able to, what you call, get this SOE part? Because ultimately when you look at the debt, which you're correctly pointing out, where's the debt? Certainly they are giving money all over the world, so they are a creditor, as Mr. Mutlikam correctly pointed out. The debt is internal. Having been an official in Vietnam, a government official, I traveled by train to China and I found...
There's a very interesting book which has just been published. Futurization. The book is called Futurization.
By who?
By Parag Datta. Have you heard the name?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful book, I'm reading it. But he says the future is in the whole world lies with VRI. VRI is the most important development project ever developed by any country in the world, including Russia, the UK and the USA. I think he is giving a lot of importance
Actually,
to
if I may
VRI.
add here on the BRI thing, where our interests converge, like the BCIM, we are actually very much party to BCIM, and the Chinese have taken it off the list of BRI projects just to accommodate India. So there is a very pragmatic and practical side to this collaboration, but there are other issues with BRI. I mean, everybody knows that.
They are going to build the high-speed train, they are going to go all...
No, but BCIM, we are joining
BCIM,
and the Chinese Communist Party
local
dropped it from the
roads they
list.
are in, sir. They are into local, you are absolutely right. They are into so many infrastructure. I just met Nathan Gadkari because he released my book. He says, Chinese are there already, where do I get the money for the roads? Only Chinese are investing. All Indian roads are also, including roads in are being made by the Chinese. And they want to come on to the Madras corridor, they have this what you call high-speed train.
There is an agreement.
They are not coming on the main one, that is the Mumbai and the Kolkata one. They want to do Delhi, Chennai. They are taking the ones which are...
I think Bangalore, Chennai is what is the contract. I mean,
So
the agreement
Bangalore,
about-
Chennai again may go to Japan because Japan is looking at it.
Acha.
But they are looking at Delhi, Chennai. They are taking on the tougher one. All tough ones they are taking. So.
Really enjoyed your presentation today. I had a question about the role of bond defaults in the expansion of the bond market. You said that bond defaults and aggregates as only 1% of the issues in China. 1%, yeah. But since most of these are government bonds, it's conceivable, at least mathematically, that the corporate bond default rates are higher. So do we have that number, or is that a problem when it comes to the expansion of the
The
market?
default problem overall in China is not high. So,
Okay.
the defaults are taking place on both sides. So you are seeing that they are already allowing defaults to take place. Quite clearly, if it's a major,
So what happens
they
after
will find
default?
out before it defaults and try to prevent it. They do not want default taking place in a major scale. So there is
So if the default is to occur, then what is the follow-up process? What happens then?
we follow the process.
I mean, the asset seizure or whatever,
Yeah,
auctioning of assets and all that.
So it's interesting to note that once they open up either domestically or foreign, they follow the rules. That's the most. This is why they attract foreign investment. Investors, you don't have to, like China, you need to invest in certain area, you have a project, will my terms be always respected? People believe, yes, they'll be respected. So that's it.
That's it.
You don't care about the rest of the travel. I haven't spoken because you know a lot about the legal side, and I would like to hear from you to some extent.
Okay. So my own sort of experience has been that the Chinese legal system is quite a complex one, but they're constantly, trying to appease or keep the foreign investors happy. They put it as a big priority, a national priority. That has been their approach. Recently, they celebrated 40 years of reform and opening up, and throughout this period, it's almost like the red carpet has always been reserved for the foreign investors. Even if a local government is going bust, they don't have money. And if it's a foreign investor's return at stake, they'll make it good because they have kept that track record. So I won't separate that from the legal system, the enforceability and all of that. Because the Chinese legal system is quite unique. The judiciary is controlled by the government. There's no independent judiciary. Rule of law until last 4 years was not a big priority. Now almost every plenary, every plenum and every NPC session, you will see rule of law right on the top, in the top 4 or 5 bullet points, because now it is a priority. But again, you get into the question of what is rule of law. They think that legislation, covering different areas with legislation is tending towards rule of law. While Western scholars will always believe that rule of law is the classical understanding of separation of powers and all of that, some of which might never be realized. Coming back to your Ravi's question of enforcement of security, I don't think any foreign investor will take security on something in China, only because of the problems associated with it. So they may take security or assets somewhere else, or they might form a trust. A security trust is the normal sort of mechanism where they sort of ring fence it from everything else, and the debt crystallizes on those assets. So there are sort of legal tools to overcome the difficulties, but if you have to find yourself before a court, a lower court, in fact some of our PSU banks have had that pleasure of going to a local court in China and trying to enforce their security. It's quite difficult. It's a huge, especially if the opposite side is a SOE, then it's almost like you're trying to recover from the government. So it depends really. If it's there's nationalism, there's national pride, and there's legal tools that you employ. And if you're not smart about it, you can easily lose your case. But there have been a number of insolvency law. In fact, simultaneously, India and China embarked upon insolvency law reform within the last 3 years. So there are a lot of efforts being done in China to prop up this kind of weak link. Because if the legal system is not bankable, then foreign investors will shy away from giving debt to Chinese companies. But so far, I offhand I can't recollect a successful case of a foreign investor invoking security and getting the asset in China. In the same way that intellectual property until 2017 there was no big case. But now those cases are there. Almost every few months there is a case where a big MNC wins a IP infringement battle against a Chinese company. So maybe this is the future, next cycle, that there will be a few illustrations of how foreign investors have evoked these projects.
When they win this case, they are able to bring out they are able to take the money out. I mean, whatever royalty payment is due to them, so they are able to take the money out.
Yes.
There's no problem.
But I just want to add one more thing, about in terms of investment, because actually I'm speaking from somebody who actually invested in China. I think some agriculture, some agriculture sector. So what the gentleman was telling me was that when the Chinese government wanted the investment, they actually laid out red carpet. So they laid out a place, this is a place you can farm and so on and so forth. And the local Communist Party chief, without his knowledge, they prepared the road to that place, built the sort of barracks for the workers and all that. And then when they started all right, but after some time, the demands became a little unreasonable. So the patronage was just shifted from that one to the other person, the local person, who actually had some other network connection. And that's when we completely priced out just squeeze out the market, and they have to close the deal. So I'm just saying, so in one way, the issue of separation is quite important, particularly when there are huge investments. I mean, I don't know whether this is a common experience or it is peculiar to the particular person, I don't know.
I mean, I don't know the facts of this case, but it depends on both ways. So normally when red carpet is given, there's a clear expectation from the local government saying how many jobs you generate. I think he'll be able to tell you how much investment you put in a phased manner. There is a timetable. If a foreign investor from any country over promises and says later on I have changed my plans, I used to plan this and now I have changed, so they're equally capable of hitting you back and making life very difficult for you. They'll squeeze you. So I mean, you should look at it as a.
So that way the condition is different from let's say in India also.
Yearly tax revenue is much more.
Sorry?
Yearly tax revenue, what you committed, if you committed, let's say 5 million RMB as a tax revenue, they will go by that figure.
I see.
And if you shortfall of that continuously for 3 years, then you would have tough time.
So they're much more lenient towards their own compatriots in that sense. That's good.
When I was in China recently, I found that language is a serious problem. For Indians, mainly people like us, Indian middle class people.
Japan too.
You can't communicate. You can't communicate one-to-one with people like we do in India because we take English for granted. But that's not so in China. So I think that could be a serious hindrance in developing. That's probably one reason why Indians don't want to invest so much in China, because we have so much of
They got beautiful girls speaking. Sir, they're not only that, they are damn very smart. I was posted in Vietnam. I'll tell you so. Yes, sir, language, I'll now tell you. Today, sir is taking the lecture and now he doesn't want us to understand what he's thinking. He'll suddenly start in Mandarin. He will answer the questions in English when it suits them. They are extremely intelligent, smart, sir, and you must understand, smartness comes from education. Sir was talking about IMF. My son is a US citizen. He's a professor in a place called College Station. Now, this is the A&M University. You must hear this, sir. Bulk of the scholars, universities in the US are running with Chinese money. And unlike our PhD, say I have to send my son for PhD, he has to pass GRE, he has to get this thing, get a scholarship. Others, where does the government servant send? Bulk of them are sponsored by the Chinese government and they are looking after universities. Now A&M University belongs to George Bush. I mean, his wife was, both of them are cremated there. Now, you would agree Texas is an oil-rich state.
I'm not talking about America.
No, sir, I'm talking about China only. I'm talking about China, they changed their language, they changed their...
But very here's the point. If you are in China, any place, you get to a taxi. You can't tell him in English.
I have to use my
mobile
phone. I speak in English. The computer translates it in English.
That's correct.
And then the driver has to translate it in his language.
Yeah, it depends whether you are in the tier 1 city or tier 2 cities. It depends on that part.
I would like to use this opportunity to actually highlight a bigger challenge.
Yeah.
Because the language actually, in the last 10 years that I've been interacting with China, it's always improving. Because now English is more popular in high school, younger people. It will keep changing, it will keep improving. But India, I think we have underinvested grossly in China studies. Which is, not language, but everything to do with China.
And language learning.
Even smaller countries like, a lot of European countries, for example, have a lot of people who understand how China works and everything. But in India, with such a big population, so that I think is a more cause for concern than the language, because language, if you're seriously enough interested in to do something with China, it's a matter of months or a couple of years. And that problem, I think today the decision makers in China are in their 40s. And in about next 5 years, the decision makers will be English speaking. So I see that problem actually slightly diminishing. Maybe in the government interaction now, they'll continue to speak Chinese, but at least on the economic side, on the business side, I think it's a matter of 5 to 10 years.
I think we should also encourage learning Chinese language here.
Yeah, we should. But I was just trying to highlight that apart from language, there is a whole other sort of set of skills that are required to deal with China.
A fascinating book by Biplab. It's called Running with the Dragon. It's a beautiful book.
Shoibal Das.
Understanding their culture is much
It's a
important.
fantastic book.
Understanding their culture, how they make the decisions, how they make
I think he identifies a lot of problems for Indians and China, and China, Chinese and Indians, and it's very, very serious.
Okay, last questions, remarks. We are drawing to our end of the 90-minute period, which we normally reserve for this session. Okay. If not, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Professor Anup Singh. He's been a regular attendee of our annual forum in Goa. But this is the first time I think he's coming for a Wednesday seminar. So I would like to give him a standing invitation. If there's any issue or if there's a recent development in China on which you want to reflect and share, please do reach out, and we do this every Wednesday, and we'll be happy to cover more subjects on the economy, industry, trade, investment, multilateral regulations and so on and so forth. So please do come and join us either as a speaker or as an observer, discussant, anything. So please do help us spread the word about this as well within your circles. Thank you very much. Your presentation was
Thank you.